Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a rather impromptu video and or podcast and or stream thing. Basically, I was doing my stream here Monday, just a nice little stream, and we had a chat in the Twitch chat, and basically they said, why don't you talk about the Shaman? And I have a guild member who I've been talking a lot to about this recently, and we thought, why don't we just sit down and record this and have a good old chat? This is entirely unscripted. If this is terrible, then it'll never make it to YouTube, but any luck, it will be fantastic. So, let's start by introducing ourselves. You probably know who I am. I am Tuskeh, and I play an Elemental and Restoration Shaman in the guild Legacy Reborn. And I am joined today by Enhancement Shaman Patrick, otherwise known as Psywave, but I will be calling him Patrick for the purposes of this particular chat. So, hello!
Hello.
So, I mean, you probably, like I said, know who I am, and you probably know that I know a fair deal about the Shaman when it comes to, I've made the guides and stuff like that. However, let's talk instead about Patrick and your particular experience with the Shaman. So, let us know exactly who you are and what kind of experience you have.
Well, I have been with the same guild since the end of Dragon Soul. I started my Shaman in Mista Pandaria. I was mostly playing Resto as I was trying out healing for the first time since I came back at the end of Dragon Soul. Ended up being Resto most of Dragon Soul. Got pretty good at it, though I was mostly just kind of middle of the pack with our guild until about we hit, I'm going to say mid-high mall, where I got lucky and got a couple of weapons and trinkets for enhancement. So I started that, and apparently I ended up being very, very good at it. I have a lot of high parts. I beat out most of our DPS in our guild. When you consider the fact that enhancement is not in the greatest position right now, Shamans in general, like DPS, are not the greatest. But the fact that I can still beat out all of our other DPS on a regular basis proves that I'm apparently very good at this.
Yes, indeed, especially considering in Legacy Reborn, which is the guild we're both in, that there's a pretty high standard in general. So Patrick definitely knows what he's doing in terms of the Shaman, despite being fairly new to the class. I'm actually fairly new as well in the grand scheme of things. I've mained the Shaman a few times, but never to any real significant level, up until probably Mista Pandaria. So let's start with, obviously, we've got a few topics in mind. I just get out my notepad here. So, the state of the Shaman right now, in Warlords of Draenor, obviously there's been a lot of debate and discussion about the Shaman in general. Not just the Elemental Shaman, because I know the Elemental Shaman has suffered in this expansion, but just the Shaman in general. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are in terms of how the Shaman has been faring in Warlords of Draenor, and what its potential problems are.
Well, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Like, I read the Shaman forums constantly, and a lot of the posts I see, people ask, I want to go Elemental, what should I do? And a lot of people just joke around and say, reroll, Elemental's bad, Enhancement's bad, blah, blah, blah. Some people seem to hate Shamans with a passion, or the fact that they just think Blizzard's given up on them. They're not that bad. The biggest problem I see is Elemental doesn't have a whole lot they can do to up their damage, and Enhancement, suffering from, while it can do decent damage, you're doing almost twice to 3 times the work as a major who can just out DPS you easily. So it's kind of a lot of work for little reward. That's the problem I see with Enhancement.
Yeah, Elemental's similar, but I think that one of the problems really with Warlords of Draenor was that with the introduction of multi-strike as opposed to mastery, which it has the same effect, you duplicate your spells. Yes. The thing is, we went from being able to duplicate almost all of our spells all the time to barely being able to duplicate any of them, especially at the start of the expansion. That was when it was really bad for Elemental, to the point where it was being out-DPS'd by tanks fairly consistently, which was a horrible experience. But you're right when you say that the Shaman is better than some people think. It's definitely middle of the road, and I think you can go a little bit beyond that if you really, really go full, top end at it. But as you said, it's very easy for another DPS class like a mage or a hunter to very easily out DPS you. But one of the interesting things I've noticed is that I don't know so much about this being the case for enhancement, but Elemental, I feel, really struggled in terms of just pure damage up until Hellfire Citadel, when we got the class trinket, which was a huge damage increase, and we also got our 2 and 4 set. Now, in case you don't know, the 2 set for Elemental makes it so that when you Earthshock, you have a 45% chance for Earthshock to not go on cooldown and for it to not consume Lightning Shield stacks. So you can get to 20 stacks of Fulmination and just Earthshock again and again and again if you're lucky. And that hits really hard, single target. And the 4 set is every time you consume 24 stacks of Lightning Shield overall, so basically every 2 Earthshocks, you gain basically a mini Bloodlust for 15 seconds. And you want to keep that buff up all the time. So you've got a mini Bloodlust at nearly all times, your Earthshock constantly refreshing its cooldown, and your Flame Shock hitting really hard, and you're still middle of the road. Like, that's how much it took to get the Elemental Shaman to that point. Does the Enhancement Shaman suffer from something similar to that?
It's a lot of button suppress, a lot of damage sources. They had to buff like our 2 main spells, Storm Strike, Flame Shock, multiple times just because they weren't hitting hard enough. And that's what they do. They nerf us to the ground at the beginning of expansion, and they give us band-aid patches to keep us viable.
Yeah, I would agree to a certain degree there. And actually, someone in the chat mentions that they say, I disagree with that way of thinking. You should never be forced to re-roll a class or spec you love. I completely agree. I'm not saying that you should re-roll. And I agree that you should never be forced to. And actually, this is something I hope to bring up when I visit BlizzCon. I hope to say to them, so what can you do for Shaman in general to ease the introduction to an expansion in for the class? Because the Shaman is typically and traditionally a class that suffers a lot in the early expansion. When you're in, you're doing your 5-man heroics and you're getting your crafted gear and you're going into your first raids. That's when it really suffers. But it gets stronger and stronger as you go into the end of an expansion. You go into the last tier. You've got your tier bonuses. You've got your insane amounts of mastery and multi-strike and haste and all that stuff. And that's the real problem, I think, right now in Warlords of Draenor, is that, and this probably stems, this is probably the root cause of why you see so many people on the forums saying that Elemental and Enhancement are worthless, because a player picks up the class and they start DPSing, they get to 100, they're in item level 650 or below gear, and they do literally fuck all, which is a terrible shame. I mean, it's easy to say it gets easier and it gets better, because it does, but first of all, the same is true of all classes, and second of all, I don't personally think there should be a massive gulf in terms of enjoyability, basically, of like, it's terrible up until you get to this item level, and then it's bearable, and then it gets fun. You shouldn't have to slog through all of that to make the class fun.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, the biggest thing that's always happened with Shaman is that we're heavily based on stats and gear. Like, some people can get some gear and be okay. Shamans are like, the more gear you have, the better and better you get, at a higher rate than the other classes.
Absolutely, and this is something interesting for raid leaders. I actually mentioned this when the expansion started, and I talked about the state of the Shaman. I made a video there. I basically said, if you're in this situation and, your raid leader is considering sitting you, just remember that the Shaman is a class that's full of promise. Like, the better the stats get, the better the class synergizes with itself in almost every aspect. And so if you are a raid leader, or your raid leaders are of this mindset, just remind them that the Shaman is all about that promise. I mean, it's all about potential, because you could be in 670 gear and be terrible, but once you get 700 plus item level, you can do well. Like, I mean, you can be fairly competitive, although that's still a shame that you need to get to 700 plus to be fairly competitive. But I think that's enough about Warlords of Draenor. I mean, it's been talked to death, really, at this point, the problems with the Shaman, and we can go over a lot of them. But instead, why don't we be a bit more positive and talk about what we want to see in Legion? Because, we haven't talked too much about Resto, but Resto, from my own experience, is something similar. They did a bit better than the other specs, I think, in Warlords, because they had the fact that they were a healer. But I think they've actually... There's a bit... Their curve is a little bit more of a line than it is a big spike. But... like I said, let's talk about Legion. So, question: what do you want to see with the Shaman in general come Legion?
I'm hoping they do a decent overhaul. They've stated that they're going to do overhauls for all the classes, and hopefully they won't forget Shamans like they usually do. I mostly like how the specs play out, all three of them. Like, I like the buttons, maybe some few minor number tweaks here and there to get us a little bit more competitive. The biggest thing I want to see is a totem overhaul, because they're just, like, you don't do much with them. They're, like, situational, you don't use them a whole lot. They're still cool and awesome, and it's, like, the icon of the class. It's just they're not a big thing.
Yeah, it is a terrible shame to have it be like, okay, the Shaman is about totems, and then your totems are marginalized, essentially. Like, you have Searing Totem, which, you've shown this to me in logs and stuff. Searing Totem it's good damage over a fight, but that doesn't change the fact that you put it down once every 50 or 60 seconds, and that's it. And it literally just goes pss, pss, every, like, couple of seconds. There's not as much impact there, which is interesting considering how the Shaman plays in Heroes of the Storm and Hearthstone, where totems are big and they're stompy and they have an impact. But I certainly agree that there should be an overhaul of some kind there. But what would you actually like to see in terms of the totem overhaul? What do you want to see them do?
I don't know if they will actually do it or if it's even like a thought process, but with the addition to the prismatic crystal that the mages get now, I wanted to see totems interact the same way that does. Like, you place down a totem, you can click on it, and throw a spell at it, and it does something.
Yeah, I agree with this. And I remember having this chat with you a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the idea of, if you've ever played the game Magicka, it's all about combining different elements and making these chain reactions. And we had some crazy ideas, but the general idea we had was that if you put a totem down, you could then fire some kind of elemental spell at it, be it like a shock spell or, say, a lava burst or something like that, or maybe a riptide or something along those lines. And when it hits the totem actually does something, like, big. So one example would be is if you put down your capacitor totem and then you used your wind shear on it, it would, like, immediately activate its stun. That was the kind of ideas we had behind it. But, like, do you want to see any new totems? Or have them, like, bring back any of the old totems?
Not really. I mostly like what the totems do already. I think the best thing to do to not like, make it super different is, instead of, like, having all these keybinds for the different totems, you just have your 4 basic totems, and you throw spells at them, and that you get more or less the same effect as they already have. You just use spells to activate them as opposed to a different keybind.
Right, and that would help somewhat with the button bloat that every Shaman has to deal with, because, I think only Druids are competitive in terms of how many buttons they have. But the one problem I see with that is that, let's say you want a Tremor Totem, right, and you're in PvP, or the fear effect from the boss is about to hit. Or in our case, the trash. The trash on Mythic is horrific. But, so you'd have to put down the Earth Totem, which is 1 global cooldown, and then cast another spell on it, which is another global cooldown. And if that spell also has a cast time, that could be like a cast time just to get the effect of a Tremor Totem. So that would obviously, overall, while being more thematic, it would be a bit of a nerf to the class, which is obviously not what we want to see, considering how weak we already are. So how would you, like, compensate for that, basically?
Well, I would honestly put it back to where it used to be before they changed it back in, MOP, where you can just place all 4 down at once. They're up for, I don't know, a minute or something like that. They don't do anything except maybe something basic, doesn't matter. And they just sit there and you have to activate them like they would just, like you usually do, except, maybe provide small buffs, I don't know.
That's the big problem with it, is that if there's going to be a delay between when you want the effect of the totem and when it happens, the totem has to be stronger than it is now, really. There are all kinds of different ideas for it.
The idea is, I don't know much on PvP. I don't, want to explain it too much there. I would say that, if we go to this point where we can place totems down to stay up for a minute, I'd say they're just not killable or something like that, or maybe just have a ridiculous amount of health, something that makes them stay up for a while. And the idea is to place where you go into combat, so they're just sitting there and you're ready to go.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. But actually, it brings up another idea I had, which was the idea of the totem belt. Now, if you follow MMO Champion at all, you notice that recently Blizzard has been talking about the art craft that they did a long time ago, where they talked about different ideas for kind of class items, like the Librams for the Paladins, the Quivers for the Hunters, things like that. Well, I imagine for the Shaman, it would be a totem belt of some kind, like a way to keep your totems on your character. So one idea I had was, why not make it somewhat similar to the trap launcher for the Hunters, where you can toggle it on and off. So if you toggle your totem belt on, when you put a totem down, you activate it on your belt, and the effect remains next to your character, or basically it comes from your character. So you could have a tremor totem that stays with you, you could have a grounding totem that its area effect is you could have a searing totem that fires from your belt, and then you can activate your trap launcher, or totemic projection, to fire, to put the totem down in the world where it does its thing. And maybe when you use the actual projection and you put it out in the world, it has some kind of effect. What do you think to that kind of idea? Do you think that's too much of an overhaul?
No, I mean, that works. It's probably a better version of what I was talking about, because you can just have it on your belt and throw it down if you need it. All that have activated effects and then...
Yeah, and yeah, that's good. I mean, it is a big overhaul for the class.
It definitely is, but we really need one.
I would agree with that. But the problem is, if you talk about overhauls, it's very easy to just make a class suddenly really, really horrible for some players. Imagine you've got someone who's like, I actually like the Shaman. Just your average Joe person, not too concerned with DPS or numbers or anything, just likes the Shaman, which is a lot of players out there, and then suddenly, bam, it's entirely different. That's obviously a worry. But I don't think the actual core of a lot of the Shaman spells needs to be massively changed, other than in terms of numbers. But, take the Elemental, for instance. I like the whole, idea of, you get your Flame Shock out, you do Lava Bursts, and you use your Chain Lightning and all that other stuff. It's a good core rotation. It's solid. It's a bit weak, but it's solid. And, how does that feel for enhancement? What do you think the core of enhancement is like for you?
I believe it revolves around, I read this that someone posted where you can use Ascendance to, it has a dynamic kind of thing, more like a stance, where you would have that, you use it as a resource almost, that and coupled with the spirits, which basically makes what enhancement is different than the other classes, using wind and the spirits and all that. They should focus more on having those play a bigger role, because Ascendance is not very useful.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree there. I know that it's kind of useless for enhancement, but in a lot of ways, it's also useless for elemental, because it removes the cooldown of your lava burst, and that means that over that duration, you're going to be casting more lava bursts, which is a damage increase. But as you get into higher gear, you have all the haste bonuses, your Flame Shock's hitting really hard and really fast, you have more Lava Surge procs, and essentially you can make your rotation almost entirely Lava Burst anyway. And that means that when you pop Ascendance, all it does is guarantee that rotation. So I'd like to see them... I think Ascendance could use a looking at as well. It's kind of an old mechanic.
I will say it was pretty useful on Iskar when we killed him.
Yeah, on Mythic, when you do Iskar, the last time he flies up, you just ignore all the ads, Bloodlust, and nuke him from range while he's up in the air. So that's the only time I think Ascendance for enhancement has ever been useful.
I was still able to use an air. I wasn't completely useless like the rest of our melee.
Exactly, and those moments are cool. That might be more to do with encounter design than it is Shaman design, but there's definitely some balancing to be done there. And I also want to point out Restoration, the Ascendance Restoration. While it is cool, the problem with it is that you basically, it's not saving you any kind of mana. So, take Spirit Link Totem, right? You use it, and you can heal your entire raid, right? You use Healing Tide Totem, again, you heal your entire raid. You use Ascendance, and if you just press the Ascendance button, nothing happens. But then if you start throwing your mana away with chain heals, you do great healing, that's fantastic, but the problem is you're now out of mana. And, I'd like to see Ascendance maybe, in terms of what I'd like to see Ascendance change to, I'd like to see them, for Restoration, make it reduce mana costs by 50% at least. so that you can safely pop Ascendance and just go crazy with chain heals, and for you to not destroy your mana pool doing so. For Elemental, I'd like to see Lava Burst like either hit harder or have a 100% multi-strike chance, or maybe cleave when you use Ascendance. But what would you like to see for Enhancement Ascendance? Like, how would you change it?
Increase our Wind Fury attacks, maybe? Like, before, Wind Fury used to be the thing where it could proc off itself and all that, and you could one-shot people. Like, that's what I had fun with, and obviously nerfed it because it was a little overpowered.
It was a bit ridiculous, yeah.
They need to bring it back up again. That's mostly my issue with what they did with Shamans this expansion, is we had some nerfs in some areas which were kind of called for. We were a little bit OP in some specific areas, like Ancestral Guidance was just way too overpowered.
Yeah, like, I remember back in the Siege of Orgrimmar on Thok the Bloodthirsty, when he was roaring, the Paladin would just use Zevo Aura and then say, okay, Guidance, and I could keep the raid alive. That was a bit much, and they have toned that down over every class, really. But, like, I don't know, like, there are a lot of things we should talk about. Actually, this is one thing I'd like to do. I'm going to send you a link over Mumble. It is a link to the talent calculator for Shaman. So I'd like to actually go over the talents tier by tier and talk about them and see if there are any outliers. And spoiler alert, there are outliers. And just talk about them and how we can improve them. So I say we start with the first tier, Nature's Guardian, Stone Bulwark Totem, and Astral Shift. So when I raid, I basically always go Astral Shift. Because that's, if you don't know, it's just a flat damage reduction for like 6 seconds.
The on-use is just unbeatable. And
yeah.
Stone Bulwark used to have its uses, but with the stat decrease and all that, and they increased the health pool comparatively to make it healing different, they did not buff Stone Bulwark to compensate for it. It just does not put enough shield on you to compensate.
I think it does like 8% of your maximum health overall. It's nothing, and I mean, especially considering the healing, the current healing meta right now is if someone's not at 100% health, they're at danger of dying. 8% health is literally nothing. There's a lot of talents in the various tiers that are they're just holes. They might as well not exist. They're just traps for inexperienced Shaman to try out. So Stone Bulwark Totem obviously could use a rework. It needs to be like double strength at least. And maybe if they do a rework, they might make that stuff a bit more interesting in terms of how it might interact. But what do you think of Nature's Guardian? Have you ever really played around with it a lot?
I've heard it's good for progression. I really haven't, just because I have no control over it. But it's a good idea. Like, I think a lot of people are probably going to go past it because Astral Shift is, like, you can use it when you want, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's that Nature's Guardian is weak. I think it's more that just Astral Shift is so strong. It's so good. I mean, this is one thing that a lot of people don't realize, but Shaman can actually be really fucking difficult to kill in a raid. Like, when the raid damage is going on, unless a Shaman makes a mistake, the chances are the raid damage isn't going to kill them. Because just the natural, unless it's really heavy raid damage where everyone's in danger, just, you know, your Astral Shift, your self-healing if you really need it, your Shamanistic Rage, all that stuff, you can keep yourself going, really. I mean, like, I've barely ever worried about you when, say, we do the High Council, where you have to run off to a corner of the room to drop a mark that damages you, and during that time you're out of range of the healers. But as a Shaman, you have all of these tools to mitigate the damage, to then heal yourself back up, stuff like that. And so, in that regard, I think Astral Shift is really damn strong.
Yeah, it's just a minute and a half cooldown at 40% reduction. It's just, you can use it for so many things, and that's pretty much why I always have it equipped, because I use it all the time. It's so useful.
Exactly. So let's move on to the next tier and start with Windwalk Totem, which is a totem that lasts for 6 seconds, during which everyone in your raid is immune to movement pairing effects. Basically, it's an AoE Hand of Freedom. It's redonkulously strong. I mean, just look at Gorefiend. I mean, we use that all the time. So I would argue, like, just make it baseline. Like, I don't see why not. I mean, because if you're raiding, it's mandatory, basically.
At the very least, make it baseline for, like, enhancement to, like, focus more on wind and all that.
I don't know if taking it away from the other specs would be amazing, but, let me explain to you the power of Windwalk Totem, in case you don't know. So, you're doing Gorefiend, and when a Healer Spirit comes out and starts AoEing the raid, the AoE that it deals, it like fires out bolts towards everyone in the raid, and it deals a chunk of damage and slows them by a huge amount for a few seconds. It's really annoying. And if you get slowed, you end up in the wrong position and you die, and it sucks. Windwalk Totem not only clears the slow, makes you immune to the application of the slow, but somehow also makes you immune to the damage application of their ability. It's literally like, during those 6 seconds, you are immune to those spirits' damage. And that's massive.
It helps us out a lot on that fight. That is one of the hardest fights in this instance right now.
Oh my god, yes. There are so many cool examples of where you can use Windwalk Totem. I mean, you can use it on Socrathar when you've got problems with the different fell lines. You can use it on Manoroth when you have to run through the pool of gunk after you've been pushed back in the last phase, things like that. It has great applications, but it makes it mandatory, because for raiding at least, the other 2 talents are garbage. I mean, look at Frozen Power. For PvP, Frozen Power is cool. I mean, just like a 5-second long route every time you Frost Shock. Diminishing returns, right? But it's really damn strong for kiting. Problem is, I don't think I've ever found myself in a situation where, as a DPSer, I have the time to use a Frost Shock with my because the problem is it shares the cooldown with the other shocks. Have you ever found that, like, if you, like, I know it's a bit different for enhancement because Frost Shock is part of your rotation, but I mean, for Elemental at least, I know that I never use it. I mean, would you ever use it solely for its utility?
Frozen Power, no. I've never used that. I have no ever intention to use that just because the root is, like, you might as well go Earth Grab and root everything.
Exactly, and this is the last talent in the tier, Earth Grab Totem. It just makes your Earthbind Totem a bit stronger, so the first time it pulses and slows something, it roots them instead. This is pretty good. I would say Earth Grab is really good in some situations. Not so much in Hellfire Citadel. There isn't a huge amount that you need to AoE root. I mean, you need to slow the ads on Kilrog for one thing. Yeah. But that's not a massive deal. That might be more encounter design. But again, the problem is you can't go Earth Grab and Windwalk. It'd be great if you could have both, really.
Yep. Windwalk is showing to be far more full, because you can still Earthbind without Earth Grab, and it's only slightly less.
Exactly. And it's still a slow. It's still helpful. So let's go to the 45 tier now, which is all about totems. So we'll start with Totemic Projection, which is another thing that I think needs to just be baseline.
I agree. Make it baseline and make it like the Hunter Trap.
Yeah, this is the spell that redirects your totems to a particular location. It's just amazing. You like every spec needs it, in my opinion. I mean, even Resto, you can argue that Restoration doesn't need to be able to move their totems, but there is always a situation in almost every fight where you need to Spirit Link. Exactly, you need to get that Spirit Link out, and you can be away from the raid. If you put the Spirit Link down and you can't move it, you have wasted a huge cooldown, and the raid will probably die because of it. But if you put it down and you just project it into the raid, done, no problems at all. And another great technique you can use, if the raid is split into 2 groups, melee and ranged, and everyone's taking damage, you put your Spirit Link down, defending your ranged group, and then right as it's about to end, you project it over to the melee group, and although it doesn't do too much for them, it actually equalizes all their health, just for like a split second. So you can you can't heal through the damage that happened into the melee, but you can help stabilize them. So yeah, Totemic Projection just needs to be baseline. What do you think of Call of the Elements, which resets the cooldown of your totems?
I have only ever actively used it in one fight the past multiple tiers, and that's for Kilrog. And that's specifically because I go down and I use Capacitor twice.
Okay. Have you ever found any other situation where it's worth giving up Totemic Projection for that?
None of them are really used a whole lot anyway. Like, I found Persistence used to be far more useful for Resto, just because you can have Healing Tide and Healing Stream down at the same time. Other than that, none of them I've had like a whole lot of usage, like the most usage being with Projection, because you can move it wherever you want.
Exactly. Yeah, I entirely agree. I mean, I think a lot of that stems from the issue that totems right now don't have as big of an impact as they as we feel they should. So if you made totems that much stronger, Call of the Elements would be proportionally stronger as well. So that might not actually need to go away, in my opinion.
I like the idea of it. It's just because totems are not that big of a thing, it's equally not that big of a thing.
Yes, absolutely. So the last talent in this tier, Totemic Persistence, which allows you to have 2 of each totem out. Well, you can have 1 extra totem out of an element. You can only have 5 in total. And it doesn't work with fire totems, which basically means that this is a resto-only talent, in my opinion anyway. There are fringe uses where, say, you have a storm elemental totem out and you also need to grounding or capacitor, but that's kind of it, really. I mean,
pretty much. It's not that useful.
Yeah, I mean, Enhancement and Elemental only have 1 water totem anyway.
Yep, like the only thing I would find use for it is, again, if I were using it on Kilrog going down into the visions, and because I use both grounding and capacitor during there, so it'd be interesting to have both that at once. But at the same time, I use call during that, so it negates it.
Right. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but here's the thing. Why do you think it doesn't allow 2 fire totems? What?
Because it would be mandatory for a DPS increase.
I suppose that's true, but...
Because you can use Searing and Fire Element.
Yeah, but that's only for, like, once every, like, at most, 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, but for Enhancement, Fire Elemental does a whole lot of damage, and add the Searing Totem on that, it would just be mandatory. Like, it would be a mandatory DPS increase, because the other ones don't necessarily increase your DPS if they get fire. So they wanted to avoid that, making it mandatory, because that's what it would have been.
That's fair. I mean, plus Magma and Searing Tome, you'd need to have both up at all times, even single target.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's fair. The unfortunate downside of that, of course, is that it means nothing to the other Shaman other than Resto right now.
Yeah, that's the bad side.
If you made Totemic Projection baseline, and then suddenly you have loads of options, because it's a case of you need Totemic Projection, but if that was made baseline and replaced with something else, suddenly the other talents seem a little bit better, because it's not as mandatory to take Projection.
Yeah. Like, it's mostly just, like, they're all pretty useless. Totemic Projection is just the lesser of all of them. Like, it's the most useful out of all of them.
Exactly. So let's move on to the level 60 tier, which is Elemental Mastery, Ancestral Swiftness, and Echo of the Elements. And I'd actually argue that this tier is okay. Ancestral Swiftness is a bit boring, but it's good in PvP. Elemental Mastery is good, it's just a good cooldown. It interacts really well with Ascendance now that they both have the same 2-minute cooldown, and right now it works fantastically with the Ring, which is also 2 minutes. Echo of the Elements is crazy, and like if they ever made Echo of the Elements baseline, I would be stunned, because it's so good. Like, for Elemental, having 2 Lava Bursts is amazing. It's so good to have that extra Lava Burst to fall back on so that you don't clip Lava Surge procs, so that you just, over the course of a fight, it just increases the amount of Lava Surges you have. And I'm kind of sad that Elemental Mastery is pushing ahead because of the Ring and because of the changes to Ascendance. But what does Echo of the Elements mean for you as an enhancement shaman? Like, how does that affect you?
Well, the biggest thing is because you get the 2 charges on 3 of my spells, it's basically, especially with the 4-piece, I use that, and Unleash Fury is like on every single fight. There's no changing it because it's the biggest increase, and it's even more so for fights that require me to use Fire Note, because I can use 2 in a row.
Yeah, I mean, Echo of the Elements in general, it used to be terrible. Like, at the beginning of WoD, it was horrific, but they changed it to make it much more interesting. And of course, 2 Spirit Links for Restoration makes that practically mandatory. That's the only change I'd like to see. I don't want to see them getting rid of Double Spirit Link, because Double Spirit Link is amazing, but it does really devalue Ancestral Swiftness and Elemental Mastery for Restoration, because it's like, would you rather have a 30% increase to have this big burst of healing when you chain heal and combine it with your Ascendance every now and then? Would you like to have this instant chain heal, this instant save someone's life heal, or another Spirit Link? It's always going to be that other Spirit Link. The others just don't offer enough. But overall, I'm actually fairly happy with this tier. I think it's really dependent upon what the atmosphere is and what the current tier is like in terms of the fights.
Yeah. I agree. Like, this tier is good. I don't really want them to change anything with it, other than maybe adjust the number a little bit to make the other, like, all of them a little more equal. They're still pretty close. And, like, if I, like, for an example, on Gorefiend, if I was not focusing on the souls, I would probably take Elemental Mastery and pour everything into bursting during the feast part.
Exactly, and I like how it offers you that kind of... it offers a lot of freedom, I think, in terms of how you want to focus your shaman, which is great. So, like I said, not too many issues with that. And now that we've complimented the shaman talent choices, now for the worst of them all. The healing tier, rushing streams, ancestral guidance, and conductivity. Useless, not so useless, and useless, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, let's start with the only one that's worth taking, which is ancestral guidance. It's been nerfed, obviously, since, Into the Ground. It's gotten a bit better. They've allowed it to interact with AoE a bit now, so it's helpful. But it's not noticeable. That's the problem. Like, you use it and nothing really changes. You just see some fancy green numbers appear alongside your yellow numbers.
Yeah, like, it used to be so overpowered, and it definitely deserved a nerf. Just not as much as they did. Like, I would like to pop it and be like, oh, look, I'm helping with the healing, but it doesn't do that.
Yeah,
No.
Me and you could coordinate our ancestral guidance at the same time and go crazy with burst, and we probably wouldn't save anyone's lives. Like, there's obviously a balance there between finding, oh, this is helpful healing, and this is nothing, and holy shit, we don't need healers for 10 seconds. Which is what it was like in Siege of Orgrimmar.
Yeah. I used to love beating out our main healer, or slash raid leader during Garrosh progression. I'd pop it in the beginning with all my cooldowns, and I'd be top of the meters.
Yeah, that was great. Next, let's talk about rushing streams. Now, rushing streams makes your healing stream totem heal an extra target and heal for 50% more. Why? Why is this a talent that exists?
It used to be pretty strong for Resto.
Right, and it is still strong for Resto. It's still my talent of choice for restoration.
Yeah.
But, of course, I see our raid leader freaking out in chat about that little comment.
Oh lord.
Anyway, like I said, it feels like a talent that should be something that you put in one point in during vanilla, right? As you get to other talents, this shouldn't be a choice because it's so useless. I mean, healing stream totem doesn't heal for anything as elemental or enhancement. It's literally not worth its own global cooldown.
I barely use it. No, it's not. I'm usually global cooldown locked anyway. I basically will only drop it if I'm sitting there air phase for Iron Reaper. I have nothing to do. There's no bombs down. I was like, okay, let's drop a healing stream because I have literally nothing else to do.
Yeah, and that's the only time I've ever found it to be useful.
And even then, it's I might as well not have pressed it because it didn't do anything.
Yeah, obviously we don't want it saving people's lives because that would be ridiculous. But I would honestly be okay with them making healing stream totem resto only because it doesn't have a purpose for the other specs. And I would be okay with having some other different totem entirely in this tier. But yeah, I don't understand why this is a thing that still exists. I mean, rushing streams is just completely pointless. It's just not worth taking. In all my guides, I say it's a good idea to kind of mix and match your talents, and they all have places. But rushing streams has no place in any situation. But let's move on to conductivity. What do you think of conductivity? Now, it actually, what it does is it makes your damaging spells increase the duration of your healing rain, which you do have access to as all 3 specs, for an extra 30 seconds overall. What do you think of this in concept?
Nice concept. It has its place as resto, but again, it's something that's useless for the DPS spec.
Yeah.
Because I'd never ever cast Healing Rain, and even when I do, it's about as useful as Healing Stream Totem.
Yeah, and Healing Rain isn't really worth existing as either of the DPS specs. I used to use it in Mists because it was a bit better then, but even then I only did it when I had nothing to do. And it's cool to have it go that long, but it's such a niche talent. Your raid needs to be stacked up for 40 seconds straight, which is not that common.
They've moved away from the people standing still and stacking. And
yes, they've done a lot of personal kind of responsibility in these raids now. So that kind of means conductivity is kind of useless in a lot of situations. Even for resto, I just prefer rushing streams because it's more versatile in my opinion. I mean, it's healing. I can project it 30 yards away from me, and its range allows it to heal someone who's out of my range. Again, in High Council when people are too far away. Just situations like that. But really, what would you do with this tier of talents, rushing streams, ancestral guidance, conductivity? What would you do with it?
I would honestly maybe combine it with the previous tier, or maybe one of the other ones to like make it a tier specifically for, like it changes the skill based on specs. All of these would be more useful for resto, with the exception of guidance, than it would be for anything else. So just make the items change, like like you see with some of the other ones.
Absolutely. I mean, they've done that with other classes. I don't know why they just didn't do it for Elemental in Warlords of Draenor. They
forgot about Shamans.
Yeah, sorry, for Shamans. They changed it very, very minorly in the last tier, but like this tier, it might as well not exist. It's so pointless, and I think it's a huge thorn in the side of the Shaman in general, I think. But that's enough doom and gloom. Let's move on to the next tier. Now this will be a bit of variance for each of the different specs. So you've got Unleashed Fury, Primal Elementalist, and Elemental Blast. How does this tier feel for enhancement, first of all?
Elemental Blast is useless. Coupled with the fact that it does 50% reduced damage, like for only enhancement, there's no reason it should ever be here. Like, put something else in there.
Okay. And what of Unleashed Fury and Primal Elementalist?
I like them both. I pretty much use Fury at all points now because of the 4-piece set. It basically gives my Maelstrom stacks, which go up to 5. It makes it go up to 10, and I can use them in sets of 5. So if I get 10 stacks, I can use Lightning Bolt instantly and more powerful twice in a row. That makes Unleashed Fury, which increases the damage my Lightning Bolt does. It makes it mandatory. Like, since I have the 4-piece, I'm pretty much never going to switch out of Unleashed Fury.
Right, and that's great. Well, actually, before we talk about that, what does Primal Elementalist do for enhancement?
It makes your Fire Elemental, like, super, super powerful. Like, he used to do 50% of my damage on, like, while he was up.
Wow.
Like, he does so much damage as Primal. Like, they do a whole lot of damage.
Yeah, and actually, this is a good point to have a moment of silence for our friend, our brother, the Earth Elemental, who has been nerfed so hard into the ground that he now represents it.
Yes.
I remember in Mr. Pandaria, the rotation when you started a fight was you start with the Fire Elemental, once that ends, you put the Earth Elemental down, and then you just wait until your Fire Elemental rotation repeats. Now, Earth Elemental hits for like 150 at level 100. Like, what? What? I mean, what would you do about that? I don't understand why they decided to nerf it.
I wouldn't have changed anything with it. It was fine the way it was. Like, not taunting bosses, doing a minor amount of DPS. It could just, like, it wasn't hurting anything.
Yeah, enough that you can throw it out and forget about it and know that by pressing that button you haven't made a mistake in terms of your damage.
I argue it still has its uses if you go Primal, though, because you can get the minute 20% damage reduction.
Yeah, and that's great. And this is actually something I want to talk about with Resto in just a bit. But let's go over this for Elemental. Now, all three of these are good for Elemental, which is interesting. Elemental Blast has more value depending upon how low your gear is, because 500 of a stat, it's just a flat amount. So it makes that a bit stronger earlier on than when you're in higher gear. I used to be really on board the Elemental Blast train. I used to use it almost all the time. I didn't like the way Unleashed Fury or Primal Elementalist played, because for Elemental at least, having Elemental Blast as part of your rotation filled some kind of gap in the rotation for me. That's changed somewhat now with the amount of haste and multi-strike that I have and the lava surges I'm getting all of that stuff. But once you get into higher gear, Elemental Blast is kind of useless, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with a talent that is only really for lower gear stuff, which is fine. Unleashed Fury it's okay. It's kind of on par with Elemental Blast, but it does better when you get better gear. But Primal Elementalist is just the winner by far for Elemental.
Pretty much.
Like, you need it. It's so good. Like, I made a huge mistake in my 6.2 guide by not mentioning how strong Primal Elementalist is, and I got a lot of flack for it, rightfully so, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, I mean, I made a mistake there. I undervalued it tremendously. I mean, it hits so hard. Which is a shame, because really all you have to do to get the most out of it for a DPS spec is take the talent and press the button, and that's it. There's some argument there, but, you know, I would like to see a little tiny bit more involvement. And it's also worth mentioning that getting your Fire Elemental to empower you with its stream of damage is just not worth the damage increase at all, ever.
Yeah, he does damage on his own without having to power you up.
Exactly. So, for Restoration, this is a sad tier, because Primal Elementalist looks amazing for Resto. Because one note you should make about the Earth Elemental and Fire Elemental, when you have Primal Elementalist, is they have that Empower ability. The Earth Elemental reduces the damage you take, and the Fire Elemental increases the damage you deal. However, both of them have a side effect of increasing your healing by like 10% for like a minute straight. That's amazing for a healer.
Yeah, 2 minutes straight of increased healing. That's awesome.
Exactly. Problem is, Elemental Blast is mandatory because it increases your spirit, and you need the regen. It's that simple. Fights are so long and so grueling that if you want to keep the raid alive, be competitive, and still have mana to continue the fight, you need to have Elemental Blast, and you need to use it on cooldown. Which is a real shame, because some of these other talents are very interesting, but they just made Elemental Mastery mandatory. Elemental Blast mandatory, which is a real shame. I know you don't play Resto that much, but it is just a terrible shame. Unleashed Fury has a bit of potential as a tank cooldown. Let me just double check what it does here. Yes, it increases the effectiveness of your next single target heal on the ally that you unleashed upon, like, much stronger by like 50%, which is great. That's good for tank healing. But again, Elemental Blast is just too important. So, last tier. Elemental Fusion, Storm Elemental Totem, and Liquid Magma. What are your thoughts here?
Elemental Fusion is quite useful. Like, this tier is good in terms of most things are kind of equal. You can more or less use any of them on any fight, and it won't matter a whole lot. It's just some minor notes here and there. I personally don't like how Fusion works, just because I already have too many things I have to worry about. What happened to worry about, like, saving Flame Shock for a 2 stack of Fusion. Liquid Magma is just beautiful, like, especially in AoE situation.
It is beautiful. The problem I have with Liquid Magma is not so much a Shaman thing, but more an everything else kind of thing. For instance, the absolute best situation for Liquid Magma is Cormoroc's Grabbing Hands. You have 20 to 30 enemies clumped up, moving in the same direction, and you need to AoE them. Liquid Magma is amazing. However, the strategy for these is to kill them instantly with warriors, which makes Liquid Magma pointless.
It doesn't do anything, no.
This is actually a problem also with the Elementals AoE in general, is that it takes time to get going. You need to get that 3 stack and then throw out the Earthquake. I know it's a bit better for you because you just Flame Shock, Lava Lash, and get going.
It still takes almost the same amount of time because you take, you do 1 Chain Lightning and then Earthquake, and there you go, you got your shit going. I have to do, since Cormoroc, I just, anchor off him. I'll Flame Shock him, it's already going, and then as soon as, the cannons pop up, I have to use 2 global cooldowns, Lava Lash and then Fire Nova.
Yeah.
Like in our raid, I do Lava Lash, get maybe 1 or 2 Fire Novas, barely 2 before everything's dead.
Right, yeah, I mean, because when you're on a Mythic, those things need to die instantly. It's that simple. So you get the Warriors to do it with their Blade Storms, and while that's fantastic for them, it really neuters Liquid Magma, and to a lesser extent, our AoE. But the problem also is, there aren't that many situations where, in Hellfire Citadel at least, where that kind of situation crops up again. I mean, Liquid Magma has its uses, don't get me wrong, but I can't think of another situation where enemies are super clumped up like that, where Liquid Magma could own them.
Hellfire Assault will work well.
Yeah, and that's fair. If Hellfire Assault...
To a point, not as good.
If Hellfire Assault weren't Hellfire Assault, and stupidly easy. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, even on Mythic Hellfire Assault, we get to the point where we don't have anything to kill. And that might be more other classes in the design of Hellfire Citadel than it is an inherent problem with Liquid Magma. Because Liquid Magma had, I think, more value early expansion when things weren't blowing up instantly.
The beauty of it, though, is, at least for enhancement anyway, and you don't have the Glass Trinket to boost your Flame Shock and all that, Liquid Magma can still be used on pretty much every fight. Mostly because it does a decent amount of single target on its own.
Yes.
And it's a 45-second cooldown, so you can use it a whole lot.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of instances where it'll do just as much damage.
Yeah, and that's great. But the problem right now, and this isn't a big problem. The problem is, for Elemental at least, is that Class Trinket.
Yeah, you can't beat it.
No, the Class Trinket increases the damage and duration of Flame Shock by 160%. It makes Flame Shock last 1.5 minutes, which means you have to make the Flame Shock hit like a motherfucker when you initially apply it. Which means you need to have the Unleash, which is default, it's baseline, and you need to have 2 stacks of Elemental Fusion. It's that simple. Everything else is a DPS loss. which is a real shame because I like the other talents. Although I'm not a huge fan of Storm Elemental myself, I don't think it does enough. It's cool to have another totem to add the elementals in, but that might actually be why they nerfed Earth Elemental, is to reduce the bloat of elementals in the Shaman rotation, which makes no sense to me personally, but
yeah, it's
maybe.
already kind of weird that you have to have your Fire Elemental 5-minute long cooldown, 1 minute uptime. It's identical with Storm Elemental, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
You can't use it at the same time.
Now, I would love to see a cooldown in Legion that's just like unleash the elements, and it's like you summon one of every elemental. Go. That would be amazing.
The Shaman version of a Stampede.
Yeah, exactly. And you have like, can you imagine like just it being like a level 100 talent or an ability where it's just like you like cast for half a second and then there's just an explosion and like your 4 totems go berserk and suddenly you've got a storm elemental totem, a fire elemental, and an earth elemental, and you could have a water elemental in there because why not?
Steal it back from the mages.
Yeah.
Give mages ice elemental, give us back our water elemental.
Exactly. That would be awesome. I'd love that. I think it would be amazing to just be like, elements, hear me, and just like, yo, I've got a whole party's worth of elementals with me. That would be awesome.
It would have to be nerfed a little bit. Like, especially with Fire Elemental doing so much damage right now.
Can you imagine an enhancement shaman in PvP just using that and just like steamrolling over people just without stopping?
Would be lovely.
It would be lovely. But yeah, I mean, they'd obviously have to tune that, but that would be like from a class fantasy perspective, that's what the shaman does. It summons the damn elements. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Storm Elemental overall as an enhancement shaman?
Not as useful as I would think they were hoping for. Like, the healing it does is minuscule, just like all the other off-healing shamans do anyway. Like, it's not even worth bothering with. Its single target is pretty decent. Like, there's a couple situations where I could probably use it. Like, if I, again, on Gorpine, if I wasn't focused on DPSing down the spirits, I'd be taking Storm Elemental for the burst phase. Because it's a decent amount of single target, and without Primal, I think it does equal damage to the Fire Elemental, or it's at least just as good as the Fire Elemental, so it's still a decent cooldown.
From what I heard, at least for Elemental, this is that without Primal Elementalist, Storm Elemental hits slightly harder, and with Primal Elementalist, they're about equal.
Yeah, that's what I was getting. That's mostly what I've heard.
But yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting. I think it might be a little bit of a test for how Fire Elemental might work in the future, because I've seen the occasional tweet or message from Blizzard that have said they are considering making Fire Elemental a ranged pet, dealing the same kind of damage, but it's just ranged now, just to kind of remove a bit of the clutter from melee. How would you feel about that?
It wouldn't change much. It'd make it more useful.
Yeah, no opinion, really.
Like, it would basically make Storm Elemental less useless, or like more useless for Storm Elemental, because a lot of the big thing with Storm Elemental is he's a ranged totem. He shoots things from range.
Yeah, I mean, it would slightly increase DPS. Yeah, and I mean, there's always that moment where, especially as Elemental, you get your Fire Elemental out, you start the pull, and then your Elemental has to trundle all the way over there. Whereas if you use your Storm Elemental, it just fires out the second you engage the boss. That's really minor, though.
And it's similar with Enhancement. Like, part of the reason, like, when you're deciding on when to pop your cooldowns and what glyphs and all that to you have to take into consideration, like, will the Fire Elemental be able to wail on the boss for a complete minute?
Right, yeah. What do you think of the idea of making Shaman a little bit more pet-focused and, like, having the elementals be a bit more, maybe not entirely permanent, but, well, let's just say it. How would you feel about your elementals being permanent?
I wouldn't mind it. Don't think they'll ever do that because they don't, like, they seem to be adamant about Shamans not being a pet class. I wouldn't mind it so much. I like it. Like, I love playing a hunter. It's like the first thing I started with. I like the idea of the hunter and the pets and all that. And I wouldn't mind that with shamans, maybe to a lesser extent, something like what warlocks do, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a cool idea. I mean, because there's definitely a parity there between the elemental pets and warlock pets. Because, I mean, like, warlocks summon and enslave demons, but shamans, they, like, summon these elementals that are, like, there's, like, a friendly kind of bond between them, as opposed to, I'm in your servitude. And, I mean, I still love the idea, though, of just, like, unleash the elements and just elementals everywhere. That would be really cool.
What about an idea of having, like, a resource? Because, you know, like, hunters have focus, warlocks have their demon power and all their different resources they use. Shamans really don't have a big resource that they kind of go after.
You're absolutely right, yeah. I was going to mention that, like, no shaman has a resource. I mean, totems are not a resource. They're just cooldowns.
Yeah, like,
that's all they are. They're just abilities that are a bit more inconvenient because they have to go through a totem. But like you don't have runic power, runes, combo points, energy, anything. I mean, mana is completely inconsequential for both DPS specs. You're entirely cooldown driven, and Resto only has the cooldowns of their healing totems and their mana to worry about. So I think there may be room for a resource in there. What would you have?
Like I thought maybe a good idea is a resource for Shaman. I don't know what the resource can be, elemental power or whatever. And you can use it on different things, like say, use all your resource and you can have a powered up fire elemental for an extended period or something like that. You can use it to dynamically change depending on what your resource is at.
That would be cool. I mean, I like the idea of, like, say, as an elemental shaman, you're firing out your lava bursts, and each time you lava burst, you gain, like, say, 5% of your resource bar, and once you get to that cap, you can summon your fire elemental. So then if you got lucky with lava surges, or you played your class really well, and you got loads of lava bursts out, overall, the cooldown of your elemental would be less than if it's just a flat kind of thing as it is now. But that might have to interact with more than just the elemental totems.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I would say that's the Shaman needs as a resource. Closest thing we have right now is Maelstrom weapons.
Yeah, I mean, you have Maelstrom weapon, and literally, I suppose you could argue Lightning Shield stacks.
Yeah, true. It's a very similar thing, but I won't count those as resources.
No, because, I mean, Fulmination is interesting, in my opinion, because Blizzard have pretty much done everything but admit that they need to change it. Because every single tier bonus for Elemental in Warlords of Draenor has been about Fulmination or Earthshock. Every single one. That's basically an admittance of, yeah, we don't know what we want to do with this. And, like, it's not interesting, baseline. I mean, the problem with it is that, I mean, it hits okay, but it takes so long to get to that point. And, I mean, say you're in PvP, you get a 20-stack Earthshock off on someone, it probably won't kill them if they're low health. Have you ever considered some kind of execute mechanic for the Shaman? Because we don't have one.
Yes, I would love an execute mechanic. Something like, Earthshock or something like that hits super powerful, but it's only usable at like sub 25% health.
That would be cool. I really like the idea of that. And this is just an idea then. You've just given me an idea. Why not make it so that the Earthshock has its own cooldown, isn't linked with the other ones, so that would allow Frostshock to actually exist again for Elemental. Then make it so that once you reach a 20 stack of Fulmination, you can use Earthshock, and Earthshock hits like a motherfucker. And then, once you get into execute range, Earthshock can be used anyway, regardless of your Fulmination stacks.
Yeah.
So that's just an idea. But yeah, Shaman do definitely lack in executes, which is another reason why they are so weak in PvP. Because like you can get someone to 10% health, but then you just have to keep going if you want to finish them off. Whereas if you're up against a warrior, if you're under 100k health, you're dead. If you're up against a monk, they'll touch of death you. If you're up against... I don't know much about rogues. I don't think they have an execute mechanic.
One spec does.
Okay, alright. But yeah, it would be cool to have an execute mechanic in that kind of sense as well. It would also make it interesting for raiding, because it would be good to see just Earthshock really near the end of a fight where you just go crazy with it. Those are the talents. Are there any glyphs you'd like to talk about? Are there any thoughts on any glyphs? Because having done some Elemental PvP, I've played about 40 or so games now, Elemental PvP, maybe more like 30. I've definitely got a feeling for some of the glyphs, because in PvP, a lot of the glyphs just feel mandatory.
Yeah.
Like you need Glyph of Lightning Shield, which reduces the damage you take when Lightning Shield is active, when it activates because someone hit you. Or Glyph of Shamanistic Rage, which dispels you. Or Glyph of Capacitome, which reduces the charge time. Or Glyph of Ghost Dwarf, which makes you can't be hindered as much by movement speed effects. Or Glyph of Thunder, which makes your Thunderstorm have a reduced cooldown. And it's like, okay, I need all of this. And I can only have 3. Do you ever feel like that with enhancement in PvP or PvE?
Yeah, like, I'd say the glyphs you have to change vastly depending on what it is. Like, for example, whenever High Maul first came out, or before High Maul, we were having to gear up. A lot of things you could do was you get 660 gear from PvP. So we did a whole stint where we would do 2v2. And basically what I did is I would take, Feral Spirit, increases the healing done by my wolves, and I would take Shamanistic Resolve, reduce my damage reduction another 30%, totaling Shamanistic Rage to 60% damage reduction. And I they basically just pop on my cooldowns and hope to God I kill them before they kill me. And I, like in those 15 seconds or something like that, I was almost unkillable.
Right. And this is actually an interesting thought. Do you think that Shaman should get an immunity?
I don't know. I don't think so.
It's a risky proposition, obviously, to give a class an immunity. But you've got Hunters with their Deterrence, obviously ridiculously strong. Paladins with their Bubble, not as strong as it used to be. I'd say Deterrence is probably a bit better. Especially when you can get 2 charges of it. But, I mean, this is a bit more PvP oriented, because like I said, Shaman are really difficult to kill in PvE. But you can burst through a Shaman in PvP. Especially in something like a Battleground where your cooldowns aren't available and you just get mown down.
Yeah.
Do you think an immunity would help?
Not really. I would say give us some more flexibility with our current cooldowns. Like maybe make the Earth Shield, Stone Bulwark. That's the name of it. Maybe make that more useful, obviously, and that can be used quite often.
Yeah, I like the idea of this whole idea of combining elements with your totems. I like the idea that if you use, like, say, an Earth Shock or some kind of Earth spell on a Stone Bulwark totem, it would just give you immunity for a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Like, just something simple like that. That would be cool. But I think a lot of the glyphs that exist right now could just be made part of the baseline spell. Like, Glyph of Ghost Wolf, like, it feels like it should just at all times make movement impairing effects less powerful on you. Just, like, at all times. Because, like, the glyph is practically mandatory if you're being slowed at all.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Glyph of Shamanistic Rage, I think that should always dispel you. But that might be a bit much.
I could probably agree they should always dispel you. It's like I don't ever really use it just because I don't find a need to dispel myself for any reason.
In PvP, I think it doesn't have as big a variety of uses as I think a lot of people give it credit for. I mean, if you like dispel a Warlock's dots, you're in serious trouble because you'll get silenced and take a huge burst of damage. The main thing is in PvE, because let's say like let's take the Iron Maidens in the Blackrock Foundry. When you get the mark from the Blooded Marak the Blooded, if you dispel it, you die. And it's interesting how it reacts with PvE, because there have been times where I've just been like, oh, I'm taking damage, Shamanistic Rage, and I just go and die. Just instantly. And I'm like, oh shit, I need to unglyph that. So if that became part of the baseline, you wouldn't have a way to get around that. But yeah, like, I feel there's a lot of power in the glyphs that could be moved just baseline into the class. I definitely feel like Thunderstorm needs something, because as it stands right now, it's okay. It's okay. I'd like to see it have a range, like just cast it on a location. That would be cool. Just bolt of lightning, bang. Like 10 yards, 15, 20, whatever. Like just a range more than if I want to knock people back, I have to walk into them and die, which is completely counterintuitive as a ranged.
Yeah, like it has its uses, but it's like I'd prefer it to be a targeted spell than just around you.
Yeah, I also agree that Thunderstorm's CD needs to be reduced as well. 45 seconds for a knockback in the PvP environment where everyone has more than one gap closer. Knocking them away with a 45-second cooldown won't save you. Like I've seen it. Like I get charged by a warrior, I knock them back, they charge me again, or they leap over to me. Like and a rogue, you can never keep them off of you with a Thunderstorm. Because, I mean, they'll either stun you, they'll blind you, they'll shadow step, they'll vanish and just re-engage, things like that. It's just not as powerful a tool as I think it could be. The problem with that, though, is that Thunderstorm is interesting in a PvE environment. And I really like the way it works with some enemies. Like, I love knocking back the spirits on Sokrathar. And I love positioning enemies when they get a bit out of the group. I love knocking things back into the tank so they can pick them up, or so I can AoE them. It's just a shame that I have to move over to them to do that. So I think that's enough of the Elemental Shaman. I'd like to know what you think of the Enhancement Shaman and what you would like to see in terms of changes made. And this is a very specific topic in mind. I've often found that enhancement suffers from button bloat. Like, you just have so many buttons, so many sources of damage.
Yeah.
How would you fix that? Would you fix that?
I like the complexity of it. just because it's like more fun, especially now that I have more haste. I'm like constantly pressing buttons, and I have to like I'm not like there's very little downtime anymore. I hate having downtime. I know we have our melee swings and all that, but it's one of the things that always bugged me about enhancements. Like there would be a few seconds here and there where like everything is on cooldown. I have nothing to do. I don't like that.
Right. I mean, would you try and? I mean, like, would you? I mean, is it a case of like just not front loading the abilities so much? Like for instance, making Storm Strike activate lava lash, making lava lash activate fire nova, something like that.
I mostly like how it plays now, like with the exception of maybe reducing some of our like sources, because we still have Wind Fury, we still have like all this other stuff that's doing all this random damage that we can't control. I like the buttons as they are now. Maybe still have Earthshock or Frost Shock as a situational use, but more or less I would like to see as like the biggest thing I think is give us more of a buff to Wind Fury, kind of like how it is with our class trinket now. Wind Fury is actually somewhat of a decent damage dealer now. Like, that was the iconic thing for enhancement shamans, and they kind of took it away from us.
Indeed, I would definitely agree with that. I remember back in the vanilla days, it was just like, oh, I'm getting meleeed by an enhancement shaman. I'm getting hit for nothing. And then suddenly, they just instantly die because you Wind Furied them 20 times.
Yeah.
Which was hilarious. But obviously, we're not going towards that these days. It would be ridiculous. But there is something else. One more question I have. Enhancement two-handed, yes or no?
I would like us to have the option of doing either. I personally like the like dual wield over two-handed.
There was definitely a time where one-handed enhancement was a thing. I think more for PvP. But, I mean, it was kind of unique in that regard, I think. That, like, you looked forward to that animation of the Wind Fury, you know, the big tornado around you. I mean, would you ever think about, here's just an idea, adding in a fourth spec that was just two-handed shaman?
I wouldn't be opposed to that. Like, I don't think much about adding a fourth spec anymore. I know a lot of people want Earth Shaman tank spec.
Yeah, I was about to ask, that's the next big one. What do you think of the shaman tank rumor?
I don't really care. Like, if they add it, great. I'm probably not going to ever do it because I don't really care for tanking anyway. Decent idea. Not going to affect me a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of a fourth spec with a two-handed shaman tank might be very interesting. Couple of things, though. First of all, the Demon Hunter, the new class introduced in Legion, can tank. And suddenly introducing two classes that can suddenly tank, I don't know if they would do that. In all honesty, I don't know if they would just say, here, have two new tanks. I
don't think they're going to add another spec. I'm hoping at the very least they'll actually give us an overhaul on all our current specs.
Yes, I think this is something we can talk about in just a minute. But I have heard rumors that Elemental will become a tank spec. I hope it doesn't, because that mean like a shaman that can only be arranged by being a healer doesn't make sense to me.
No, range tank didn't work out. It didn't work out well for WildStar when they had those engineers and were range tank.
No, indeed not. I did actually play WildStar. That was a fun game. But let's talk about the fantasy of the shaman now. So let's talk less about how hard your abilities hit. Well, we can include that because that has a lot to do with the impact of the combat of the game. But how do you feel the shaman plays, especially the enhancement shaman, just plays, you know, how does it feel to play? Like, do you feel like a totemic warrior? That says it all really, doesn't it?
It's like, I like the idea of how everything works. You know, like you empower your offhand with Bolt of Lava. It just doesn't look like it doesn't look the part unless you're looking at damage meters in which Lava Lash hits a whole lot.
Right.
Like, give us some more spell effects, some different spell effects maybe. I kind of like the idea of how Thrall goes about, you know, doing his damage. He has Doomhammer in one hand and he throws a Lava Burst in the other hand. I kind of like that.
That's cool. I like that idea. I would not be opposed to giving enhancement Lava Burst and having it affected Maelstrom weapon and just having them throw it out with their other hand. I mean, you could redesign enhancement to be a one-handed spec and have them casting spells in their other hand while also meleeing and using abilities in their main hand. Can you imagine what that would be like to play? Like a class that can actually cast two spells at the same time?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
That would be interesting. Like, that just hit me. I mean, like, with the one hand you're doing your, like, you could just make Lava Lash, make that your main hand as well. So you hit with, you know, your Storm Striking and your Lava Lashing and your Fire Novering with your right hand, and then with your left hand you're using Lava Burst and Flame Shock and Chain Lightning, and like that would make the spec redonkulously difficult to play, I think.
Yeah. Problem is they would have to change Storm Strike since you actually attack with both weapons with that spell.
Right, yeah. This is, of course, assuming an overhaul. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the class fantasy, I think the Elemental Shaman is okay. There are some aspects that I think need work. Lava Burst feels good, mostly because you see that big old number. It's got a distinct sound, a distinct animation. It looks good.
They changed it too. They changed it in Warlords. It looks a lot more fancy now.
Yes, I like what they've done with it. It looks good. It could used to hit harder. I mean, it does kind of suck. This is actually the thing. Elemental sucks in PvP because of Lava Burst. Lava Burst doesn't hit hard enough. Here's the problem. If you make Lava Burst hit really hard, you get into dangerous scaling territory. If you've got a Shaman with great multi-strike chance, and then you Lava Burst someone really hard, and you fire 4 Lava Bursts in their face, they'll instantly die.
Don't forget crit.
Yeah, crit contributes to your multi-strike chance, so a 4th multi-strike chance. Or 3rd, technically, but yeah, like I said, you fire a 4 at once, and someone just instantly dies. That's not fun for either side. It's fun for one side for a while. That's my problem with it. It feels like Lava Burst doesn't hit hard enough, but it's made up for in the fact that it hits so often. Like, Lava Burst hits harder as Resto than it does Elemental, just baseline. Which is, that's a horrible sensation. I mean, even though it doesn't technically, you don't feel like you can fire off this massive Lava Burst. And I think this is actually a really distinct and very specific complaint. I think that they need a different way to show multi-strikes in the combat text. Because, like, you see the 30k and then immediately it's overrun by, like, a 15 and then a 15 and then a 15k. And that's all you see. You don't see 30k plus 15 plus 17 plus 15. You only see the 1. And that, I think, actually literally takes away from how multi-strikes feel. Especially for Lava Burst, when it hits so hard, you don't feel it. You don't feel the multi-strikes, you just see the individual ones. Unless you have an add-on that, like, changes the way damage is displayed. And you shouldn't need an add-on to make a class fun to play.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, as far as, like, numbers go, like, watching your numbers hit and all that, it's kind of underwhelming. Like, it's always fun to watch yourself, like, shoot off 4 Lava Bursts right at once. Like, I am super entertained by that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a great feeling. I think they're just, like, it would be cool to communicate that a bit more. And it's actually interesting to see what the removal of multi-strike even means for Elemental. But
I hope they go back to the original mastery of Elemental.
Mr. Pandaria?
Yeah, the Mr. Pandaria.
I would disagree personally. I don't like the idea of going back on ideas. I think this is the perfect time for an overhaul.
Like, we definitely need some multi-strike on there. But a lot of the reasons I played Elemental back in Pandaria because I was the swing player in Pandaria. I was Resto Elemental, and I just loved, like with AOE's, you're just like your go Sith Lord on them, all the Chain Lightning.
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember the first guide I made for Mr. Pandaria, I was like, Sith Lord, yep, Chain Lightning is the best spell. It was a bit strong to the point where you just used Chain Lightning and didn't stop in some cases.
Yeah.
But it felt so damn good. And this is something I'd like to see. Let's quickly talk about spells that you would like to see that you've seen, like, NPCs use or stuff like that, or just concepts that you'd like to see for the Shaman. For instance, I want Forked Lightning. It's that simple. Like, in a situation where enemies are all spread out and I can't Chain Lightning one to make it jump and get an Earthquake, just let me Forked Lightning everything within, like, a 90 to 120 degree cone in front of me.
Yeah, just like the Mage Icelands.
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny is that when you can probably attest to this in Mr. Pandaria, because of the way the multi-strikes jumped around, sometimes it would look like your Chain Lightning was starting from a different target when it multi-struck. That moment when you had that perfect moment where you had the throw of lightning out, it would go in one direction, and then you would have it going, like, from left to right, and also right to left. It was like a cone of lightning.
Oh, yeah.
It looked amazing. That would be cool. I'd like to see just Forked Lightning to go out there and just zap some enemies. Also, I keep seeing in Twitch chat, people are suggesting Earth Hand, like the Thrall Earth Hand. That would be cool. I'd like to see, the Chromog grabbing hands from the Magnaron and Thrall's grabbing hand that he used on Garrosh. I'd like to see that. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I like that as an idea of a straight-up root that we can use. Like, throw a hand on him, keep him still.
Yeah, and it would also be cool if it would work kind of like the Priest Tendril ability, where, like, the root is like 20 seconds, but if they kill the hand, it breaks. That would be cool. I also see someone suggesting Rock Spear. That might be kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, are there any abilities that you want to see for the Shaman?
I haven't really thought about any abilities. I kind of like with the abilities we have now, they just need some tweaks to make them better.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is something that's very important, is that, as you said near the beginning of this chat, Shaman are a numbers class. It's that simple. Like, we live or die on literally how hard our spells hit. I mean, that sounds like something that's very simple for, like, every class, and in a way it is. But because the Shaman has no resource system, and its totems just aren't all that strong right now in terms of utility and convenience, Shaman live or die on how hard they hit. And because we got the short end of the straw, really. We got the short end of the stick this expansion, which is a real shame. But that said, let's start moving towards a wrap-up. And so I'll start by asking this. Are you going to re-roll in Legion?
I definitely am not. I'm sticking with Shaman.
Good man.
Enhancement Shaman all the way. If nothing else, then I get Doomhammer.
Exactly. I'm sure that's a massive bonus for you. I don't know what Elemental's going to get. I have no idea. But yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. So I want to hear your conclusions for the Shaman, just in general, and what you want to see in the future, and just stuff. Just conclude for me, my friend.
Totem overhaul is the big thing I would like to see changed.
Mm-hmm.
More or less just some tweaks, like maybe enhancement, cut out a few spells, make some things hit a little harder, change the numbers up a little bit. I don't really want to see a big change in how enhancement plays out. Same with elemental, except maybe like make their cast times a lot quicker. Like I think you had this in a video somewhere where you said make whatever it's called, lightning bolt 1 second.
Yeah, that would speed things up, I think.
Yeah, because that was my big thing about not wanting to play elemental this time, because everything was like a 2-second cast time. It felt so slow until you had high gear.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really big problem with elemental right now. Is again, it's why people feel so weak in the early on. It's because they cast so slowly.
Yeah.
And once you get into the good gear and you've got 1.5 second casts for everything, it feels much better. But you shouldn't have to go through 6 months of torture to get to that point. Yeah, Felrin says it in Twitch chat. Lightning isn't supposed to be slow.
Yeah, it's not.
It's bang, lightning, not then lightning. But yeah, so yeah, definitely the totem overhaul I think would be good. One last thing before we end. Do you think, and this is a common complaint from a lot of people, and it's become somewhat of a pattern that people have noticed, so to speak, over the years, do you think that things are going to get better or worse for Shaman? Because people have, in the past, basically said that Blizzard hates the Shaman, they nerf it all the time, and they don't give them anything. Do you think Legion will finally be the expansion where they go, Shaman, it's your time, things are about to get really damn interesting? Or do you think we're just going to get half-hearted band-aid fixes and delays and excuses?
Well, the good thing is they've said that they're going to overhaul pretty much all the classes, and they're going to focus more on the fantasy of the class. That makes it sound good for Shamans. But if you go back to the history, they tend to leave Shamans alone and not worry about us at all. I'm hoping they change us for the better, give us some overhaul. I would kind of be surprised if it happened, though.
Yes. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to say they're going to do it. I really hope so, and I think that they've demonstrated that they see the problems, and they've definitely said they want to get to the fantasy of all the classes, which I think will let them have a good look at the Shaman. And I know we haven't talked too much about Resto here, but I'll go over it from what I understand fairly quickly. My problem with Resto at the moment is there's so much emphasis on chain heal, and it's literally just chain heal as much as you can, and a lot of your tier bonuses interact with chain heal. Your class trinket interacts with chain heal, and chain heal is an awesome and very cool looking spell. I mean, I wouldn't change the way it looks at all. I think it looks brilliant to have that either golden or watery beam bouncing between players. That's really cool. But I think that it's more tweaks for them than anything else. I wouldn't change anything too fundamentally. I would probably increase the power of some of their other spells and maybe give them a tank cooldown, because they lack a tank cooldown right now. Aside from Earth Shield, which isn't a cooldown. But other than that, I'm honestly kind of happy with how Resto plays. The throughput isn't quite as strong as some other classes. I mean, I'm sure you've heard me bitch at our Paladin raid leader for constantly out-healing everyone by like 40k constantly, but I think that's more a Paladin thing than it is a shaman thing. And
Doesn't help that he happens to be stupidly good at his class.
yeah, like I dare you to find a better holy paladin than the Link Thorm. But now that I've sucked up to my raid leader, I think it's time to conclude. So thank you very, very much for having this chat with me, Psywave. It was great fun, and you're a very knowledgeable player.
All right, thank you for inviting me on here.
Indeed, and with any luck, we shall do something similar to this in the future, and maybe we can have a good old chat about the changes, hopefully, that happen with the Shaman and introduced in Legion. Hopefully we can have that chat. If not, we can bitch at one another throughout our raids and hopefully in another video. So thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think of Patrick, our guest, and of these kind of videos in general. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.